everybody. This is a really great forum. I love this. It's really great to be here. I've had a really wonderful time in India. I've been here since Sunday, my first trip here. I've learned a tremendous amount about the country already and realized I have way, way more left to learn, so I'm just starting. I'm going to talk today about what I call good weather, bad weather. And this is really a talk that I prepared about the U.S. I'll try to translate it into the context of India as I go, but please feel free to ask questions as we go along. And really, the issue here is why weather will be so important to the coming generation. And I'm going to talk first about the good, the potential for what we're doing, and then I'm going to talk about some of the challenges we face. That's why I call it good weather, bad weather. How's that? Is that better? Okay. So I'm going to ask you to forward the slides here, and I hope there are a lot of transitions in them, so I'm just going to say next, and we'll see how that works. Go ahead, next. Okay. So weather forecasting has evolved a lot, and this is a rather U.S.-centric view of it, but I hope it translates to India a little bit. So if we go back, say, 50 or 60 years, people used to create weather forecasts by hand. They used to draw things on maps. Meteorologists, weather forecasters used to do things in their heads. They'd look at a map like this and they'd say, aha, I know what's going to happen next where we live. But it was a very human-intensive process. It involved launching balloons. It involved calculations with things that weren't real computers. It's amazing what we did 50 and 60 years ago before we had computers. It's almost hard to imagine today. Next. It's a lot different now. We can do things far more than what we could do 50 or 60 years ago. So we have satellites. Satellites that first started appearing sort of in the 60s and helped us learn about what Earth looks like, how it's changing. Gave us the information we needed to be able to see what was going on around us in a large context. And computer systems that started emerging, say, in the 70s and the 80s, that allowed us to create a model of the entire atmosphere. So prior to that, people were doing all these things in their heads. They were calculating these little lines. And all of a sudden, starting in the 80s, we could replace all of that with a model of the whole atmosphere, let that model work its way forward over time, and that became our forecast. And gradually over time, these models have replaced the human forecaster to a large extent. So what happens now is when you see a forecast, when you see a weather forecast, most of that starts with a very, very large model running on huge computer systems that runs several hours at a time, and out of that comes a forecast. And that's what human forecasters rely on today, much less of their instinct. A lot of this was instinct. A lot of this was their experience. Now we've replaced that instinct with real physics in these models that replicates the entire atmosphere of the world and allows us to forecast more accurately. And as a result, you get things like this. So this is a three-dimensional view of a cyclone. And we can do those models. We can start with the observations, the satellite observations that tell us what's going on now, and then we can model it and it'll tell us what's going on 10 hours from now or 100 hours from now. So it's really magical what we've been able to do over the past 50 or so years. Next. And because of that, its uses have evolved. Now, I don't know about the TV weathercasters here. I understand you do have TV weathercasters here, although I haven't watched. But we used to have people who were kind of silly looking sometimes, talking about the weather, because the weather at some level was entertainment. And the weather forecasts weren't all that good, so they had to replace it with entertainment and put up, silly pictures of clouds and suns and things like that. Next. Today we do things in a very precise way. And so what I'm going to show you here is something that my company has done, and you'll see this little dot move. And if you watch the temperature change, this is the actual temperature forecast. Sorry, it's in Fahrenheit degrees. And we move across, and it goes from like 85 degrees down to 59 degrees. Because this is the San Francisco area, and if you gave one temperature forecast for the San Francisco area, you would be very wrong, because the temperature varies so much in just a small area that you have to be able to provide a forecast for here and here and here and here and here and here and here. And that's all new. 50 years ago, we couldn't do that. It's all new, and it allows us to understand what's going on around us and what the future is going to be at a very precise level. And if you're planning some event that you're going to have to cancel because of the rain, you want to know whether it's going to rain where that event is. You don't care if it rains 50 kilometers away. That doesn't do you any good. Next. Now, the forecasts have really improved dramatically because of all of this. So here's a chart that shows, there's a lot of details on this chart, so I'll try to walk you through them a little bit. So here's what's called forecast skill. 100% is a perfect forecast. 30% is a not very good forecast. This is time starting in 1980 and going out through 2007. The blue here is the forecast at day 3, so 3 days from the current time. Red is day 5, 5 days from the current time. Green is 7 days from the current time. So what I've done is drawn a line here at the forecast skill for day 5 back in 1980, and if you follow that line along here, what you see is that day 7 is now better than what day 5 was only 30 years ago. That's a really substantial improvement in a relatively short time, and we continue to make further improvements. Now, just to sort of help you through all the confusion on this chart, one of the interesting small tidbits here is these, the colors here, the top of the color actually shows the northern hemisphere. The bottom of the color shows the southern hemisphere. Now you notice out here, they're the same. Back in 1980, they're very different. Why the difference? What have we done? Well, most of that is satellite data. So in the northern hemisphere, we have relatively good observations. We have observing stations covering much of the northern hemisphere. Not true of the southern hemisphere, largely ocean. And so we were missing those observations. Satellites have helped fill that in. So now we can do in the southern hemisphere what we've been able to do in the northern hemisphere. We're beginning to get a globally accurate forecast. Next. Okay, now here comes the challenging part. This is the movie. And before we try to start the movie, I want to tell you what I'm going to do here. How many have heard of Hurricane or Superstorm Sandy? Pretty good group. Okay. So in the U.S., hurricanes tend to form off the coast of Africa, and then they come sort of to the west, and then they turn and they go up the east coast of the U.S. And sometimes they hit Florida, and sometimes they go up the coast a ways, and they hit Carolina. But they tend to follow the same general pattern. Superstorm Sandy did not follow the same general pattern. And what's amazing about Superstorm Sandy is that despite that, our models forecasted Superstorm Sandy quite accurately. And what I'm going to show you in this movie is just what it took to do that. I'm going to show you two movies. The first one is really a replica of the clouds. So the typical picture you see of a cyclone with the clouds spinning around. I want you to see what that looks like. And then I'm going to show you a little more technical version in 3D with all kinds of stuff coming down from above us, and it gets complicated. So let's see if you can find that movie starter. No, here, let me do that. It's going now. Now, it's going to take a few minutes. So here's where it ends up. Now, we're going to rewind in a second. It's going to start back down here. It's going to go up the east coast, and then it's going to take a sudden left turn. And it's that sudden left turn that was really unusual, and that's what caused all the problems. Normally, it would just keep going straight, and it would go out into the ocean. It took a sudden left turn right into New York City, almost as if it knew where it was going. So watch this. Watch this. It'll come up here, and right about here, look at that. Boom, to the left. Wow. How could you ever predict that? That looks like it's impossible. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Yeah, just go to the next one. Now, let me explain to you part of what happened. This is a plot of something that I'm not going to try to explain it completely, but this is what's going on in the polar region. And these are essentially blobs of cooler air that are extending down. And they kind of move their way along, and they kind of go up and down. And this is how the polar region interacts with the mid-latitudes and equator. So you get all this kind of stuff moving around. What we're going to see is that one of these blobs kind of curled around the cyclone and pulled it back to New York, just as it was about to escape. And what's amazing is that the computer models predicted that 7 days in advance. All of that. Not only that, this blob came down from up above, down towards where the cyclone was. So let's see if we can start this movie here. Okay. So you're going to see this thing that looks like a miracle. So here's this blob. This is in 2 dimensions, and it wraps around the cyclone and pulls it back in. But when we go to 3 dimensions in a second here, you'll see just how complicated it is. Okay, here's the blob that's going to capture the cyclone. It's almost like a horror movie. Here it comes, here it comes. Wraps around. Okay, let's go to the next one. I think I might have one more here. Yeah, okay. So you saw that little monster come in and grab it. Now here's the 3-dimensional version. So if you really try to understand it, you got to see things in 3 dimensions. So here's that arm that wrapped around. It actually comes down from way above. And here's this Sandy. We'll start with it down here, and you'll see this thing come down. Now watch this. Oh, it's coming down. It's coming down. It's going to grab it. It's going to grab it, and it's going to pull it into New York City. Wow. And the models did that 7 days ahead of time and got it right. That's where we've come in the last 50 years. It's really pretty amazing. And to me, that's a foundation that tells us we can do some really profound and interesting things in the future. Go to the next one. The challenges of technology. So this is an example of an application. This is pretty simple that allows you to find the weather anywhere in the world. You just type in the name, or you type in actually, with this application, you can go to a map and drop a pin anywhere. So we were in Omaha, and we said, okay, we don't really want Omaha. Let's try someplace else. Seattle. Let's go get the weather in Seattle. And up comes the weather in Seattle. Well, we don't like that. Let's go to Miami. What's the weather in Miami? Up comes the weather in Miami. Let's try something a little more complicated, Berlin. Up it comes. Let's get even more complicated. Let's go to the pyramids of Giza. Wow, we can find the weather anywhere. And what's amazing about this is on a mobile phone. Who has mobile phones? Nearly everybody in the world these days. So we can take that tremendous computing power that allows us to predict exactly where Superstorm Sandy is going, and we can deliver it to everybody in the world through their mobile phones. That really is a profound change. And that, to me, is why the future is so exciting. Because the things that were sort of reserved to people in the developed world or to people who had enough money to pay for it, really good information, now is coming available to everybody in the world to make their lives better, to make their lives more efficient. And there are all kinds of ways this will happen. So in the U.S., for example, when you drive cars on roads, a lot of times the roads are icy. Probably don't experience that much around here. We have a lot of problems with ice and snow. 7,000 people are killed in the U.S. each year driving on roads because of bad weather. 7,000 people. Now, somebody described this to me one time. They said 7,000 people is the equivalent of one airliner crashing every week. And if one week, wouldn't we do something about it? But we really don't take the time to think about things like people driving on roads. You know, it's just one of those things we accept, and we should not accept those things. We need to do better than that. And so one of the things my company is doing is we are beginning to produce road surface forecasts, ice, snow, wet, dry, for every kilometer of road in the U.S. and eventually the world. Because we think that by delivering that information, not just as general maps, but as individualized information to each vehicle, we'll be able to save lives. So those are the kinds of things that are possible, and it extends to even more trivial things. So, you know, perhaps you're trying to schedule your cricket game, and you schedule your game, and then all of a sudden it rains, and you have to cancel the game, and now you have a few hours where you could have done something else, but it's too late to do something else. So even trivial things like that make your life less efficient. All of this impacts people in the developing world. You know, farmers having good access to weather information to know when to take their crops to market, for example. We know that that can help them avoid sort of predatory pricing in the market. So some people have good information, some people don't, especially in Africa. The people who don't have information are taken advantage of by the people who do have good information. Let's get good information to all 7 billion people. For some people, it's